welcome to Space Adventure. This is the 3D game that I am designing, and let's go do a quick overview of the project tasks and just kind of see where I'm at and what's happened. Okay, to start off, Space Adventure is a sandbox space game in a 3D environment, and also Space Adventure isn't going to be the final name. This is kind of what I have for now until I come up with something. The game is going to have future releases, and it definitely isn't complete at this point in time, but it's pretty close to where I would expect it to be at this point in time. So some of the core tasks is I need to generate a logically connected galaxy. Some of the games I've played in the past that are similar to this have sectors that are connected in really strange ways. This one is connected in an XY coordinate plane, and so you can see some of these dots, and it might not make a lot of sense right now. The colored dots represent debris for a sector, and so they would have 8 dots possibly formed in a square. These black dots represent where there's a sun or a solar system, so that gives you an overview of what it's going to look like. I want to render the player view from within the single sector, and the camera for the player needs to be stuck to a ship, and then I am supposed to have a basic ship. I wanted to have something a little bit more than what I have at this point in time. It's just a plane with some texturing added to it. The sector should have planets orbiting a sun, and it should be acting kind of like some Newtonian physics, what you would expect. A planet will be orbiting faster if it's closer in and slower if it's a little bit further out. Then ship movement can be commanded using the keyboard commands, and this is what's taken the most effort and what I'll go into the most depth over. And then travel between sectors should be fairly quick, and that is definitely taken care of. Then some of the other tasks that I had in mind are as such here. I wasn't able to get a lot of these things done, but I do believe that I kind of overshot. And so what I would have liked to have done is create some of the character objects and their relationships and kind of get it to an interaction point a little bit. But yeah, as for the rest, I really went a little bit too far. But let's go and take a look at this. Okay, so this is the top screen view. I already have it so that the ship is in a moving state, and it's got just kind of some weird stuff going on. I kind of like it. So what's happening is you have a line which is the path of the ship movement, and I've created a Bezier curve movement system. You can see how things are changing as it goes along. It refreshes the path every once in a while, recalculates and sees which planets are going to be involved in its path. And so it does create a curved motion, and every once in a while it just changes direction entirely. And it also makes sure that it doesn't run into planets or the sun, and so it creates a curve around that planet or sun's orbit range. And so this is not going to be a typical game environment. This is just for testing purposes. Now, as you can see, the ship has entered an orbit with the planet that was targeted on. Let's go and take a look at some other things here. Okay, so this is the 3D view of the game. Now what I've done is I already told it to move to a planet. I'm moving to planet 3, and I tell it to engage, and it gets into this path. And it's fairly jumpy at this point in time. Now there's some interesting things that happen. The ship asks its path where it's going to be in the future, and then it angles itself to look that direction. Now, when the Bezier curve gets recalculated, sometimes it makes a fairly big jump, or kind of small jump actually is the main problem. The big jumps, the ship movement actually handles really well, and it turns at a good slowish pace, and it feels pretty smooth. The small jumps, it is able to take immediately because it's within its range of movement within a single frame speed. So now here we are again in that orbit path, and if we look to the side, there's a planet right here that we're looking at. Now let's talk about the Bezier movement. Here's the Bezier class header, and just an overview of what we have here. We have the constructor, the destructor, drawing functions, get position for the ship, and then the get future position so the ship knows where it's supposed to be pointing at. Calibrate, which lets the ship tell the Bezier how fast the ship should be moving. And then we have a get connected path in case once the Bezier is finished, then it can hand off a new path, such as an orbit around a planet, and then it also hands off a final target, a move target, which would be either a planet or a border, so then the ship knows kind of what it is that it's reached. So what we do to position the ship, we find out what is the closest point on our Bezier curve. And so we start at the middle of our path. So we have our middle here, and we just loop through this this little area right here. If we are not as close to the middle as we are to the point left of it, then we're going to shift our view to the left side, as we would if we were closer to the right point. And so essentially here we are doing a binary search of the path, but we also have to check the points right on the sides of the middle that we're paying attention to, so we can figure out, you know, which direction is closer if I move that direction, and then we know which point we're closest to on the path at that period of time. So now we have the middle point. What we do next is we go through a loop, and we keep on moving forward along the path from point to point until we've cut down on the distance that we want to travel entirely, and we just keep on cutting it out until we've reached where we want to be. So what happens here is we have if our distance between where we are and our next closest point is smaller than, or is larger than our distance to travel, then we want to travel in between where we are and the point where we want to be next. Next we have the area where our distance to travel is larger than the distance between our ship and the next point we're looking at. So the first thing we do is we subtract the amount of distance between our ship from the distance that we have to travel. And then afterwards we decide, well, if the closest point we're looking at is equal to our end point of the Bezier, then we don't want to travel any further, so we're just going to set our points to the x and y position of the end of the path, and then we're going to brake, and that will finish our path. If not, then this is going to be the next area that we're going to, which is going to be the most spent area, time spent area for this function, at least if the path, the distance traveled is large. So in here what we do is we set our position to the closest, and then we change our middle pointer's number up a little bit further so that our next closest point is what we're looking at. And so we just jump from point to point to point until we then have to either go into this function and end our loop, or go into this function and end our loop by just going somewhere in between our position and another point. Update is where the Bezier is really created. And so in here, we want to make sure that we're not constantly updating at a point in time where it doesn't matter. So just in case, so that if it's called multiple times, we check to make sure that it hasn't been rendered already. If not, then we set our last rendered to the current time, and then we just loop through the current path and we delete all of the points that we've created. Now we then clear the path, the current path, and we start over brand new. Right here is the point in the Bezier where our current path is created. This is the most important spot. This has to be able to dynamically create a Bezier based on any number of points that are going to manipulate it. So the planets influencing the curve and its path. It has to get the current path scale based on how many planets are going to be in there, and then it uses it to calculate how much influence each planet has on where the point is at. So if we have a path that is made up of 1,000 points, then we need to loop through each of those points, find out their x and y coordinates, and we loop through each of the planets and the sun, and we discover, how much influence do each of these have on the position of that point. Okay, so let's just take a quick look of the remainder of the things that are happening in this game. And so, first of all, if we look back at the sector, we can see that the planets are moving slightly faster around the sun than the ones that are on the outside. The ones closer move quicker than the further ones out. We also can see that there's a bunch of these border markers, and I am on a border at this very moment. And what happens is at border 1 we're going to move up in the y direction. At border 5 we're going to move down in the y direction. We can see the direction of, or the sector position that we're in at the very top right of the screen. If we go to border 7 or over to border 3, we're going to change in our x position. So let's make a jump here and see what happens. Now we're in another sector, and so we've just changed over, and we can navigate through the entire galaxy this way. We can just jump from border to border. Okay, so here we can see at one of the borders we have some border debris, which is a rock that is generated by, you start off with a cube, you randomly extrude different sides of the cube, and then you take some of the vertices of that object, shift them around a little bit, and you get some jagged edges. And so right now we've got the borders with debris filled with these rocks, and I'm actually going to have to do some things to optimize, because if I actually fill it up more densely as I would like to make it look more threatening, it does dramatically cut down the refresh rate of the screen. And so I actually have to go and make some changes, and I'll probably use these rocks in a little bit of a different way than previously planned. but this is one of the things I really enjoyed creating, is this random generation of these rocks. Okay, and as a final summary of this project, here is my record for my commits in GitHub, and as you can see, the project, a little bit of a wavy graph, but fairly even level of work done throughout the semester, and a little bit of work done before the semester started. And if we look at the code frequency, we can see that the amount of lines of removal were pretty consistent with some of the additions. There were a lot of changes that had to happen, especially with the Bezier curve. A lot of changes right here at the end. Lots of work put into it. But that is the work that was done. That is Space Adventure. I hope you enjoyed the review of it. There's a lot that is going to be worked on during the summer, and it should hopefully be a very involved game, and I'm looking forward to working on it some more. So far it has been a real challenge and a really interesting piece of work to write. Thank you for your time.